Hello, today's tutorial is on downward facing dog pose, Adho Mukha Svanasana. So this pose stretches out the entire posterior chain of the body, the calves, the hamstrings, glutes, the spine, the back, and the neck. It also strengthens our arms and shoulders if you're not used to putting weight on your upper body. So let me first start with a demonstration of this pose. There are two ways to measure the distance between your hands and the feet in this pose. And the simplest way, actually, is from Majariasana, cat and cow pose, where your wrists are under your shoulders and your knees are under your hips. So your hands are shoulder width apart, and then your knees are hip width apart. And from here, try to lift up your hips and slowly you push back and straighten your legs if you can. And eventually, if you can bring your heels down to the ground, bring them down to the ground. As for the shoulders, you can distance the shoulders from the ears or vice versa, okay? So your arms are in external rotation or pointing to the front. If you can, try to bring your abdominals towards your thighs and your chest towards the ground, and your head stays neutral. And this is a traditional alignment where your back is straight, okay? So for the other method is plank, and the distance could be wider actually between your feet and the hands. So let's get into plank pose, and from here we bring our hips up in the same way. If you can straighten your legs, straighten. If you can bring your heels down, bring your heels down. Okay, and the back stays straight. Okay, now let me first talk about the one thing that I see most common in beginners starting yoga, doing this pose. As this pose requires actually quite a lot of flexibility in the calves and the hamstrings. So most of the time, it's very hard for students to maintain a straight back as per traditional alignment. So most of the time, these students they try to bring their legs straight and the heels down, but the back is rounding so much, okay? So I want you to focus first on the position of the back. So if you need to bend your legs, please bend your legs as much as you need while keeping your back straight, so not rounded, so that you can keep your back straight. Eventually, if you feel like you can maintain your back position, try to slowly straighten out your legs and bring your heels to the ground if you can. But of course, if you feel too much tension in your calves, in your back, in the hamstrings, please bend your legs and keep your heels off the ground, okay, as I showed. And another way is, if you really feel a lot of stretch in the calves, and it might be a little too intense, you can place a block under your heels as a kind of a support, okay? All right. So position the block under the heels so that you can just rest your heels down, even instead of having them suspended off the ground. And this way you can slowly work on this position. All right. Now, let me talk about how to adapt yoga and this pose to your practice and your body. So, the traditional alignment says that your hands have to be shoulder width apart, your feet have to be hip width apart. But as you might be aware, it is also possible to do downward facing dog with your legs together, like that, okay? You can either go up like that already, or you can go up the traditional way and then just walk your feet together. Okay? So you can also move the feet apart. And that the same applies also to the positioning of the hands. So as you might have noticed, if you have your legs closer together, it is slightly more intense. It it is slightly more difficult, and if you have your legs slightly wider apart, and it makes it slightly more manageable, the position. So at the end of the day, the goal is to choose the variation that actually works best for you. If you don't feel anything already in the traditional alignment with your legs hip width apart, feel free to experiment with putting your feet together so that you can actually gain some benefits out of this practice. Okay? And as for the positioning of the hands, as all of us have different shoulder structures and bone anatomy, sometimes you might feel more comfortable if your hands are slightly wider apart or slightly closer together. And that's totally normal because we are humans anyway. So if in the event that you don't feel the most comfortable with your arms in this position, you can always experiment, okay? And the same applies because I personally know students who feel better if their hands are slightly externally rotated. So it goes this way and this way, where the index finger actually points to the front instead of the middle finger, okay? So instead of doing it the usual way, you slightly externally rotate the hands. And that's absolutely normal too. So it's about finding the thing that feels best for you. And you can only answer that question if you try it and you listen to your body. Okay? All right. So now the next thing to talk about, the distance between the hands and the feet. So I know that sometimes it may not be, maybe during your practice it's not very consistent. Sometimes you may end up with a shorter downward dog. Sometimes you might end up with a longer downward facing dog. So the thing to understand in this is, what are you trying to get out of this practice? So the closer that your feet are to your hands, we can actually try it in almost like a standing forward fold position, Uttanasana. As you can feel, the stretch in the calves is less intense. And as you distance your hands and your feet, you start to feel the calf stretch intensifying, okay? So eventually, if the longer downward facing dog is harder for you because of the ankle mobility, well, don't feel like you only have one kind of alignment or one kind of distance to work with. Just experiment, okay? Because eventually, what is the purpose of this pose? To improve the flexibility of the posterior chain of your body. And if it's too intense for you, it's gonna overwhelm you. So just work with it at your level, okay? So now, I mean, the position of the shoulders, as I've mentioned earlier, our shoulders, for example, if we bring our shoulders close to our ears, this is more like, for example, movements in handstands. You might do it this way, but in chaturanga, you actually bring your shoulders away from your ears. So as for downward facing dog, again, the same question applies. What do you want to achieve? And in this posture, it's not as demanding as, for example, handstand or chaturanga. So in a way, you can decide what feels best for you and experiment with it. So you can get up into downward facing dog and see what makes you feel best, okay? And that the same applies to the position of the neck as well. Traditional alignment says your neck has to be neutral. But if you relax the neck a bit, you might feel a different sensation. Maybe you feel more of a stretch in the neck, in the back of the neck. So, or if you tuck your neck to your chin. So at the end of the day, it depends what you want to achieve from the practice and from the pose. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you for the next one. So please like and subscribe. Namaste.